This now, we're going to cross live to Kuzman Iliev. He's the chairman of the political party Bulgaria Can. Thank you very much for joining us, Kuzman, on the program. First of all, I'd like to ask you about what Vladimir Putin said about these new sanctions. Of course, he said it's not going to affect Russia very much, but it may have some serious consequences for the international markets. What do you think about it?
Thank you for having me. Russia will feel the pain. Almost 1/3 of its budget comes from oil exports, even though 80% now go east. But you're right, this is a global issue. Disruption of supply chains drives oil prices up. Europe will suffer the most. It has lost its energy sovereignty and faces deep economic stagnation now. Even the US is not immune. Inflation, slow growth remain key challenges. The global economy is interconnected and no one is safe now.
Well, another thing that Mr. Putin mentioned, of course, was that these sanctions raising oil prices in general are going to have bad consequences for U.S. consumer prices of gasoline. That's something that Americans really don't like. I mean, what do you think about that? Why do you think Trump decided to do that?
Sanctions are a form of economic warfare. They either force negotiation or drain financial capacity. Russia is already at the table of negotiation, so this means that the real goal here is to keep it weak. This affects Bulgaria, my country, directly. Lukoil, for example, supplies 50 to 90% of our fuel market. Without it, we face poor bargaining power and rising prices. Due to the Green Deal, I want to remind you, Europe has lost stable energy sources and refineries, and this leads to high production costs and loss of competitiveness. As a result, the US is hurting its own allies, and instead of cooperation, we see hostility. I think that we should build bridges, not walls.
Well, interestingly enough, we saw the U.S. announce these new sanctions at the same time that it said that it was going to postpone the potential meeting between Trump and Putin in Budapest. And also, we saw the European Union launch its 19th round of sanctions against Russia. Do you think that's a coincidence? And is this 19th time probably finally going to have some sort of critical effect on the Russian economy?
Well, the EU plans to abandon Russian gas by 2028, as you say. For Hungary and Slovakia, for example, this means economic and energy collapse. The EU bypassed possible vetoes by calling this measure trade-related instead of sanctions. If Brussels continues this way, it will hit a wall. Instead of ideological crusades, it must focus on prosperity, competitiveness, and energy security. Bulgaria, for example, and Eastern NATO members are most at risk if peace talks fail. So we must work for peace and regional cooperation to prevent this instability.
It's also important to understand that this is also happening when the European Union has announced it's trying to push through some sort of initiative in which it's going to use frozen Russian bank assets to finance Ukraine. But recently they decided that there needs to be more of a legal basis for that. Why do you think they're trying to do this?
Well, honestly speaking, Europe has already stepped back from many of its commitments. I think, to be honest, the EU plans to abandon Russian gas by 2028, as I told you. If you allow me, I will elaborate further on that in the next question.
Okay, well, I just wanted to also understand, what consequences do you foresee for the European Union if they follow through with this pretty opposing stance when it comes to Russia?
Well, the European Union, as I told you, it loses this economic battle because it started an ideological crusade, and instead of prosperity, instead of competitiveness, instead of creating opportunities and dialogue, And I think that Europe will lose more than it wins.
Well, in the midst of all this, of course, there's also talk about taking Hungary's veto right away in the European Union. What do you think, looking inwards in terms of the European Union, what kind of consequences could that have for the future?
Well, let's have the big picture here. If you allow, Trump is now pursuing a new colonial strategy, which is visible in Venezuela, Colombia, Middle East, Europe, China. And this is a strategy of economic and military domination, so to speak. His main objective is to separate Europe from Russia and make it energy and economy dependent on the US. So Europe will take on debt, will buy American weapons and move its industries overseas. Trump's ultimate target here is China and BRICS. So Russia is China's strategic energy partner. Therefore, Russia must either align with US or be weakened economically, military and politically. So Trump could have stopped the war in Ukraine, but instead he turned it into a business. Europeans will pay for that. And what is the problem here is that nobody really control the escalation ladder anymore.
Well, you mentioned climate earlier on, and I wanted to ask you about the fact that the United States has recently demanded that the EU roll back some of its climate legislation, obviously, because they want to export more American liquefied natural gas to the continent. How do you think Brussels is going to respond to this, and what kind of effect could it have for the European economy?
Let me remind you that Europe has already stepped back from many of its climate and human rights commitment. The ban on combustion engines is already delayed. The EU stance on the Middle East crisis is weak and uncertain. I have in mind the human rights properties issues regarding Palestine, for example. Even Ursula von der Leyen, she admits that Europe is deindustrializing under the Green Deal. So the economic challenges are growing by the day. Militarization is definitely not the answer, and Europe needs reasoned dialogue and technological progress to remain competitive in this global environment. Europe will be hit very hard.
All right, Kuzman Iliev, chairman of the political party Bulgaria Can, thank you very much for joining us on the program.
Thank you for having me.